Hi, everyone, and welcome. See folks starting to join the room. We will get started in about 90 seconds. All right, it's the top of the hour, and Garrett is doing his welcomes in chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for this webinar about taxpayer receipts. If you could, locate the chat window, let us know where you are calling in from, who you are, what you love about taxpayer receipts, any sort of intro that you'd like to do. And we'll do our own intros as well. A little bit of housekeeping in addition to the agenda. We are very lucky to have Hunter from the city of Virginia Beach today with us to talk to us about taxpayer receipts. And we're going to talk about the why and the what, and also leave some time for question and answer and discussion. So if you could please ask your questions in chat. Garrett will answer anything that he can in real time, and also triage some of those more strategic questions for live Q&A later on in the webinar. To that end, we'll go ahead and get started with introductions. And Hunter, if you are ready, we'll have you go first.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hunter Anderson. Like they said, I work for the city of Virginia Beach as a management and budget analyst, management policy analyst, whatever you want to call it. Pretty much do it if it has to deal with budget.
Love it. Chris, you want to go ahead?
Yes, I'm Chris Adams. I'm the president and founder of Balancing Act, and we recently merged with Polco and are very excited to spread the word about simulation-based public engagement, as well as the value of taxpayer receipts to have a good, productive interaction with your residents on financial issues.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm Meghan Ruble. I'm the VP of Customer Experience for Polco, which means I'm lucky enough to work with all of our customer-facing teams, including Garrett, who is managing the chat today. He's the Director of Customer Success for Balancing Act, and we are the center of all things customer here at Polco. So very excited to meet and speak with all of you today. To round up on that housekeeping that I talked about in the earlier slide, we will be recording this. We are recording this, and we'll share the recording with you all, in addition to any resources that we might mention that aren't kind of living in these slides tomorrow via email. So you can look for that in your inbox. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about who we are, what we do, and how we came to kind of put this webinar together for you all. As Chris mentioned, Polco and Balancing Act have merged. And one of the big catalysts for that merger was that we are very similar organizations. There's a lot of mission alignment. We both consider ourselves very active partners in the success of the governments that we work with at the local, state, and federal level. And I think if I synthesized our teams in a very concise way that doesn't involve a lot of acronyms or academia, we're governors. We're folks that really love this work, that really believe that the work we're doing together is transformative at a generational level, and can help you all build healthy, strong, and thriving communities based on some really great community engagement, data-driven decision-making. Some high-level stats for us: we've got about 30 million voices represented across the US at all three levels of government. We've got about 350 government partners. 1 in 5 of our staff members has sat in a chair that a lot of you are in, working at local, state, or federal government. And with the earlier partnership with the National Research Center, Polco and Balancing Act have 30 years of survey expertise and verified resident data, kind of powering a lot of the insights that we're delivering and the decisions that we're helping you all make. How we view our work from this lens is kind of what might look like a traditional engagement cycle, public engagement cycle. There's an engagement component, of course, that we are going out and helping you all actively ask questions, gather feedback, identify priorities. We are then putting that into our model to help you understand what that data means. That's the assessment piece, really trying to take input and turn it into insights. And Track is that data engine that I mentioned. So we have a really strong partnership with ICMA, NLC, Stanford, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison to combine publicly available data with our own research and resident-backed verified data into one very powerful dashboard to help you understand all of the context around some of the things that you might be seeing in real time. How does that information compare to what you might have heard last year or 10 years ago? And what does that mean for you and as you your community as you make decisions to move them forward? So, all right, 2 quite happy slides into a slide that looks kind of sad, but I want to really point out that we are very good at seeing opportunities that might look like problems in other places here at Polco. So nobody understands the kind of trust gap better than the folks that have joined this call with us. So I won't belabor the point and the outcomes and the ripple effects of what declining trust can do to your work in your communities, but instead talk about the opportunity here. Part of that active partnership that I mentioned that's really important to Polco and Balancing Act is relentlessly scanning the landscape for things that we can build and deploy that help you all do your work better, that help you bridge some of these gaps, and do so in a way that fits in really seamlessly to what you're working on now. So I think the taxpayer receipt, when I think about that, is a really perfect reflection of this. We really understood that there was an issue to be overcome in not being able to have conversations when we aren't armed with kind of those commonalities and those common understandings. So with the taxpayer receipt, we know that there are 2 things that can come out of it from a trust perspective. And one is that we cannot have any sort of conversation without that commonality, without that factual understanding. And then it becomes much more meaningful to the individuals when they understand it at a personal level, at a household level. How does this affect me? What is my kind of skin in this game, if you will? So the taxpayer receipt, in addition to a lot of other things, does 2 of those things very, very nicely where trust is concerned. What does this have to do with me? And then it helps you all framework future conversations based on that commonality. So I think that's the trust perspective. There's a lot of other really wonderful outcomes that can happen from using these types of tools. And I think I'll kick it to Hunter to talk a little bit about what that's looked like for Virginia Beach.
Yeah, and while Hunter's getting ready to share his screen, I think he's going to share his screen. I'm just going to provide a little bit of background on our work with Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach was one of our first 3 customers in 2015, and the very first customer that we had to use the taxpayer receipt. It was the leadership that we worked within was, I think, very thoughtful, very concerned about demonstrating value to residents, and really wanted to provide some meaningful ways for transparency. And so it's really fitting that on this webinar that we have Hunter to sort of talk about, what's happened in the last 6 or 7 years, or 8 years, I guess it is, in order to sort of get them to the place that they are now, and some of the things that they've done in the last 8 years that the taxpayer receipt has played a little bit of a role in. Virginia Beach and the Hampton Roads areas has a great history of doing public engagement, especially on the budget. One thing I want just to comment on with Hunter and the Virginia Beach taxpayer receipt is that they use some interesting revenue estimation choices, a little bit different than others, but I think it actually illustrates the versatility of the taxpayer receipt revenue estimator, and that it's really meaningful to that particular government. So I'm going to turn it over to Hunter now to sort of talk about how this has worked for them for the last 8 or 10 years.
Good afternoon, everyone. Like they said, we have a unique taxpayer receipt. So if you're looking at our taxpayer receipt and you're wondering, well, that's not what ours looks like, that's because we have an unusual way of calculating general fund revenue. Our primary revenue streams are going to be the real estate tax, and then what we call the property tax, which is really your vehicle tax. Very confusing for the citizens, but we try to explain it and make it as clear as possible. And this is one of our best ways to do it. In Virginia Beach, we're able and fortunate enough to use all of the tools that Balancing Act offers us, and we utilize it and visualize it as a step and tiered approach to get citizen engagement. And it all starts with the taxpayer receipt. That's kind of that gateway tool to get people in to understand, oh, me as Joe citizen, when I pay my taxes on my home and my car, it goes to these departments and this interaction, and I can understand that I am paying $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, however much it is, and this is where that money's going. Then once they get that, they can use our prioritized tools to look at some of the things we're potentially adding in a budget, what we're potentially having to cut if it's a reduction year, and they can voice their opinions on it. And in doing so, they can give us some of that value added feedback and understanding how that might impact them numerically and in their wallets. And then of course, we use a simulation tool to show that big broad stroke of this is truly what we're talking about. If you want to have the full, complete understanding of a large size locality and what that and the difficulty it is to balance it, which is the crux of all the burden that we bear as budget offices across the United States of demonstrating the difficulty that comes with that process. So for our tool, if you were the median citizen of Virginia Beach, you would click on your home. If you did not know where to find it, you could click on the assessed value, and it would tell you. If you go to our city real estate assessor's website, you'll put in your website link, or you'll put in your home address, and it'll immediately populate how much your home's worth in the most recent assessment, and you could plug that in. Similarly, for a vehicle, you could go to Kelley Blue Book and assess your average value. If you didn't know it off the top of your head of the most recent assessment from the city, like most localities, we do it about once a year, and it's about this time. So hopefully they still have their mailed receipt or their e-receipt that they receive from the city. But if they don't, we try and gently herd them into the direction where they could find the information most effectively. And for us, the reason we do have multiple other revenues that do funnel into the general fund stream that would go to this, but we try and pare it down to these specific revenues because some of the other revenues are much more discretionary in terms of either a meals tax or general sales tax. And people tend to either severely overestimate or severely underestimate how much they buy in prepared meals or general sales. And we don't want people accidentally misrepresenting and freaking out when they see their tax burden or thinking that they're getting the bargain of a century and they can just go out and spend, and it won't matter. We want to be truly representative, and we can always have those conversations when they call us or talk to us or see us at a public hearing. But for the purpose of this, we try and make it as user-friendly and mistake-free as possible for the average citizen to invest. What we also do, and what we really try and focus on, so what I'm going to do is put in the median value of an assessed home in Virginia Beach, $400,000, and the median assessed car value. Yes, I know the numbers are strikingly different, but home values have gone up since the pandemic, so that's definitely had a massive impact in our locality. So once you put in your assessed values, when we're budgeting in Virginia Beach, have two distinct goals. One is that transparency goal because we want to build that citizen trust and engagement, but two, it's outcome-driven budgeting. We focus all of our budgeting decisions and goals and long-term strategic planning on broad overarching concepts. One of those concepts is 21st century infrastructure. One is safe and healthy communities. And we align departments within those broad concepts to show citizens, this is what we're going towards. This is what we're engaging in. This is set forth for us by city council and their initiatives. And then city staff takes it and evaluates it. And there's a tiering system within it. So sometimes there's something within safe and healthy communities that overranks 21st century or vice versa. For our locality, we are a very low-lying locality, second only to New Orleans. So flooding is a really big problem for us. We have a bond referendum that came out last year for $500 million to address these projects and expand 30 projects into 10 years. So we're rapidly expanding capital investment to address that. So while oftentimes our main priority is a safe and healthy community, in this instance, 21st century infrastructure is very impactful and very meaningful to our citizens. And when they come and talk to us, they want to know, what are you doing about flood protection? Where's that money going? And they can see it. If they're looking at their last year's receipt to this year's receipt, there's a market difference in capital investment, which is its own separate category. And within the 21st infrastructure, you can see it in public works. There's been consistent increased investments. And we note that in our prioritizations and our balancing act simulations as well. But those are some of the things that when we're able to show these outcome-driven budgeting things, it starts to mean something to citizens the longer we use it. We're in about year 4 or 5 of using these outcome-driven budgeting systems. And the greatest thing is, as a citizen, when you're dealing with these massive concepts and massive dollar amounts, when we break it down to these taxpayer receipts, you can quickly tie what you personally believe in to what you're seeing in dollar amounts, where you think the money should be going to, and they can give us that feedback quickly. And it really allows us within that feedback loop, if we're able to effectively engage citizens and give them that good education, it leads to better city outcomes for us, because we can articulate why we have to invest more in 21st century infrastructure when historically we work more to invest in safe and healthy communities. And it'll click and they'll understand that. And then that conversation can happen whether they agree with it or disagree with it. And then we can move forward with city council understanding what the citizens believe, what staff believes, and finding that happy middle ground that creates a trust in government, but also a feeling of true engagement long term. And that's why for us, this taxpayer receipt is the best gateway that we can possibly provide to get them on those deeper, more meaningful conversations.
That's amazing, Hunter. And you alluded to a couple of other things that Virginia Beach does, including the simulation and the prioritized tool. And you said that this was sort of the gateway. I'm interested to hear how this is just a part of your multi-pronged strategy for budget engagement. As I said earlier, Hampton Roads, I got Norfolk and some other places that do a really great job with budget engagement. Could you just say a little bit more about that, and even
Sure,
why it's important for you?
sure. So we are a fairly large locality physically, and that creates a lot of diversity in terms of half of our city is farms, half of our city is an urban center. We have ocean fronts and massive tourism investments. So like any locality of any size, we have a ton of different stakeholder groups and engagement who have a lot of different ideas and often competing ideas. So when they're in the news or they're reading news articles or they're just talking to their friends, they hear a lot of different things. But if they can understand personally, this is how it affects me, they can put in their home values. They can understand, I personally pay $50 for IT or $100 for the police department. Well, do I personally want that? And then they can go into the next step of, well, if I want to pay more for one department or I want to pay less for one department, how can I actually do that? And so we have one website on the budget that's all of our interactive tools, and they can just simply step by step, once they've done the taxpayer receipt, boom, you can click into our prioritization and it'll show you the different tools. Then once they go to that, boom, they go into the balancing act, see the full scope of what we're talking about and all the different departments that we have going on. Not only that, we have multiple engagements with different stakeholder groups. We'll go and meet with them in the public personally. And when we go there, we'll bring like a QR code or the links for them and say, scan it on your phone. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on the website. We'll have computers there if they need to, if they don't have the opportunity to engage in that. We use the different languages because we have large immigrant populations here. So we have a lot of people engaged that way. But the way we do that and we allow that allows for when change happens, because we all know it's a mad dash for a few months of constant change, constant change. What are we looking at? We can have that open dialogue and show the change and be like, this is like, we did all of our tools now and we're about to launch a new tool next week, even though we're halfway through the process, because there's a reduction opportunity that council sees to help alleviate some of the tax burden on the locality. So now we're going to roll out a new simulation that shows what do these tax reductions look like in reality and what services are you willing to sacrifice to give that burden to citizens. So now citizens are going to have a whole new tool understanding the baseline budget that we were working with and where they could go to see some of that tax relief to take off some of those skyrocketing housing prices or skyrocketing car values that they've experienced in the last few years. So when we're able to consolidate it all on one page, but also allow quick user-friendly interactions from step to step to step, it allows citizens in 10, sometimes 30 minutes if they really want to invest to understand at any level of their choosing how they can engage with us and how they can give us feedback. Sometimes it's just telling us to our face that they like it or they hate it. And sometimes it's really taking the time to click all those comment sections and provide that commentary and feedback, which we love it because more data is never a bad thing.
Yeah, oh, that's great. You guys are actually an exemplar for some of the really cool things going on in local government right now. GFOA is spearheading something called Rethinking Budgeting. They're doing it in partnership with ICMA and the National League of Cities. And I think you guys are just a great story about how that robust engagement with the public and tying your budgeting to outcomes and goals and plans and being a little bit nimble can really help to serve your government, but also to serve your residents most importantly. So congratulations on that. And thank you for sharing your story. All right, I just want to show you that in addition to the residents and government being able to benefit from this this robust and nimble and responsive way of thinking about budgeting and interacting with residents, the media really appreciates them as well. If you go to the Balancing Act website and look on the press page, I think you'll see about 4 or 5 stories about Virginia Beach, including TV. So budgets. Good news, budget stories don't really get on TV very often, but I just grabbed this screen cap because this is an anchor woman from Channel 13 in the Hampton Roads area, and she actually pulled up a version of the Virginia Beach simulation, and she's doing it live with a big touchscreen in front of everybody. I just thought this was such a fun picture. I just wanted to show everybody. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit more about kind of the nuts and bolts, kind of the you know, what a taxpayer receipt is, why you might want a taxpayer receipt. In addition, I don't think I could do better than what Hunter talked about, but then also to give a little bit of evidence about this too, a little bit of the theory behind it, and then also to show you how to make one, because they may look complicated, but they're actually fairly simple. So the first thing I want to talk about is just demonstrating the value that taxpayers are getting for their tax dollar. And there's no better way for me to do that than to go back once again to 2015 when Virginia Beach started doing this, but go back to the creation of both the Balancing Act budget simulation and also the taxpayer receipt. So we've been working with our subject matter expert, who is the CFO of a fairly large city, and we got the simulation to the point that we thought it was in good shape and ready to release to local governments. And then she said, you know, the other thing I'd really like to be able to do is to show residents the value they're getting for their tax dollar. And she said, you know, we've all seen like the dollar bill chopped up, and you've got, you know, 9% going to parks, you've got 23% going to public safety and police and all that kind of thing. She said, I don't think that really does much for you. It just tells you percentages. It's really just a glorified pie chart. And she said, here's what I really want to try to convey. She said that she used to go into meetings with community members or to chambers of commerce or to you know, key clubs and things like that. And she'd always start out her budget conversations when she would talk about the status of the budget. She's CFO of the city of Denver. And she used to say, how much do you think that the average Denver resident pays for snow removal each year? And for whatever reason, the guesses were always about $200. And she would get a big smile on her face and she'd say $12.50. How is that for a deal? And so it just sort of illustrates a lot of things. It illustrates how bad we are at estimating when the numbers are so big. You know, the numbers that would be in a typical government budget are so big, we have no idea what that means, what it means for service, what it means for ourselves. But we also, there's a problem, I think, for local governments in that people think that they're paying more than they actually are for some of these services. And so what a taxpayer receipt can do is it can actually say, you know, this is what you're getting. And you know what, look at this, $12.50 for snow removal in Denver. Not bad. How's that for a deal? And so, but we didn't want to just have, you know, a replication of a pie chart. We wanted to actually estimate the actual revenue in it in some reasonable way. And that's why you have Virginia Beach, you know, they've got their motor vehicle tax, they've got their property tax, their residence tax, and those are the 2 revenue sources that were useful to them. But we have you know, other ways of thinking about that too. So I'm going to show you that in just a moment. But I want to talk just a little bit about this meaningfulness and relatableness of transparency. So another one of our favorite customers from the opposite side of the country is Corona, California. And so the tip, and one of the things that I think is great about government in the US and Canada is that it's pretty transparent. I mean, financial transparency kind of exists, but in most places it exists in a way that isn't relatable, isn't really understandable. It's not really getting you much bang for your buck or bang for your effort when it comes to your transparency efforts. So this is the budget book. It's very similar. You probably got one sort of similar to it. And you know, it's nicely done. But the problem is that it's 365 pages long. So unless you're somebody like Hunter, whose like full-time job and professional training is to understand this thing and read this thing and even write this thing, it probably doesn't mean too much for you. It's probably not a way to build a relationship, to establish trust, to demonstrate value. So, but that's okay. And the budget book has a purpose. It's really just not much of a purpose for transparency, meaningful transparency to residents. I mean, sure, you know, you can show your work and people can look things up, but I don't think it really has that trust building value. So the next thing that a lot of governments have done, and this is also really cool too, is that they've come up with data dashboards. And I actually love these things. They're fantastic. And so I went to the city of Corona, went to their data hub, and I just grabbed a screenshot of their general fund. And so this is from 2023. And so you can see right here, police department is budgeted, looks like about 50 million bucks. Once again, we have a hard time understanding what 50 million bucks is. So it's really nice that the city of Corona has put this together, but I would actually say that something like this might be more useful to somebody like Hunter than just an average resident who might click on. So it's good to show your resident that this exists, but it probably doesn't, once again, have that value of demonstrating value to the public for a tax dollar, building trust. And so I want to just show you, I'm going to diverge this a little bit. Humans are bad at understanding large sums. And so what I've done is I've just grabbed a picture. So this is $10,000. This is a stack of $100 bills, and it's probably about 3/4 of an inch high. $1 million is maybe 3 inches high. $1 billion is, what is this, 8 and 10 pallets of $100 bills. So so my hometown, the city of Denver, has a budget, I think, of about $1.5 billion, depending on which funds you include. And I have no way of really understanding what that means. But if you say I'm spending $12.50 for snow removal, that actually means something. I feel like I'm getting a pretty good deal. So that's one thing that the taxpayer receipt can do really well, is it can break this down so that people can actually understand. They can make that connection. They don't have to sort of grapple with, what does $1 billion look like, or what does $1 million look like? And I think that's just a really powerful thing when you're trying to build trust. So in a second, I'm going to actually show you the city of Corona's actual website, the third thing that they do. So they've got the budget book, they've got the data dashboard, and then they also do the taxpayer receipt. So this is what it looks like. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to show you actually what they've done. So I'm going to break away, and we're going to go to the city of Corona's website. And so they, just like Virginia Beach, they've got a page that has a lot of their interactive tools that they have so that people can understand things. And so they just very clearly say, want a receipt for your city of Corona taxes. And so it says, answer a few questions and find out how much you paid. So then there's English and Spanish. And then they also have their simulation down here. And they've got this really nice little video too that they produce themselves. So let's go to the tax receipt page. And just very simply, want a receipt for your taxes for fiscal year 2023. And it says, what's your annual income? So they've got different revenue sources. That's why I wanted to show you this compared to Virginia Beach. So I'd say, what's your annual income? And if people want a little bit explanation of what that looks like, oh, it looks like they didn't fill that out. But basically it just says, put in your salary, basically roughly what your income was. So I'm going to put in, I don't know, $65,000, how about? Maybe a little bit low for that part of the country. And then I'm going to put in age, and I'll just put in 40. And so what this is doing is it's estimating sales tax. So we worked out a way to use the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey to say, if we know somebody's income and if we know their age, we can actually do a lookup. So somebody with $65,000 of income has X amount of disposable income. And then a 40-year-old buys a certain market basket of goods. And so we've kind of come up with a sort of a generalization that works for most cities, but we can also customize it to say, okay, 40-year-old buys a lot of goods that have a sales tax attached, whereas a 90-year-old would buy a lot of things like healthcare services that don't have a sales tax attached. So if we have these two bits of information, we can then on the back end enter the portion of the sales tax that goes to the municipality or to the county, and actually come up with a pretty good estimate of how much somebody's paying in sales tax. Okay, so these two are for sales tax. And then down here, do you own a home? This was something similar to what Virginia Beach did. And it says, what's the assessed value of your primary residence? And they actually have a link to their assessor's website, so you can look it up. And then you can enter it. And assessments in California are sort of wildly divergent. It depends on a number of different factors. So I'm just going to put in 50,000 bucks. An assessed value is usually a portion of what your market value is. We can actually, with this particular one, we can do assessed value, actual value, market value. We can kind of do whatever you want on the back end. You just put in some different variables. And then you say view your tax receipt. And then you get what looks a little bit like a Home Depot receipt. And it says, here are your estimated taxes. And so then you see the city manager's office, $46.10. And you see that also includes homelessness, the homeless programs. So you can click on that and kind of understand what that is. You can look here and see what the city manager's office is actually doing, $13.58. You can scroll down and scroll down. And let's go to that. Let's look at police, because that was the one that we looked at. We saw the big bar graph that showed $50 million. So if you go to police, you find out that this person whose info I just entered is paying $314 total to police. And then $155 is going to patrol. You've got the Special Enforcement Bureau at $25 and so forth. You've got, dispatch services, $29.35, et cetera. And so it just kind of breaks it down. All of a sudden I can understand that. And so the other thing that my acquaintance who was the CFO of the city of Denver used to say is, you got a cell phone in your pocket? And everybody says, yeah, we got a cell phone. And she says, you know what, if you were to take out your cell phone right now and dial 911, within 6 minutes, you'd have 6 people with about $2 million worth of equipment willing to risk their lives to help you. And she said, how is that for a deal? So being able to put that into context. So you think that $314 might be a lot of money, but if you think about what public safety actually is and what you get for it, it's actually a pretty good deal. So then you can scroll down and then you can see what the total tax liability is if you add up those 2 types of taxes, and you click on this, and then it says, okay, $331 was sales tax and $832 is property tax. And then this is down here, it's just an invitation to go to the other tools, the simulation. And you can use these, together or separately, but it just gives you an invitation to go to the simulation and try that for yourself. Okay, so I'm going to not dwell here. I'm actually going to go back to the presentation, and actually we're actually going to build one. So I'm going to go to the back end, to the control panel for how you manage balancing act simulations and taxpayer receipts, and we're going to create one. And so I'm going to call this Demo Town, and we're going to say we want this in English, but there's all these different languages that we could have. And then the easiest way to create a taxpayer receipt is if you already have a simulation, you can actually just pull in those spending categories. And what it does is it pulls in the categories and it pulls in the descriptions and whatever graphics you put in there to let people know what a spending item is. So I'm actually going to just duplicate our demo. So I think we call it Demo 2.1, I believe, or Anytown 2.1. What do we call that? We've got this
Features
our
demo
demo
2.0.
Features demo. Okay, thank you, Garrett. There, where is it? Oh, sorry, I was duplicating from the tax receipt. I'm going to duplicate from a simulation. That's why it wasn't coming up. And here we are, Features Demo 2.0. Thank you, Garrett. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to pull in. Let me just switch screens. It's going to pull in all this stuff. So police, and then all these nice contextual items over here: police operations, role of civilians, etc. And then I'm going to go ahead and create this, and then it's going to pre-populate all the spending items over here. So everything I just showed you is all right here. And if I wanted to change it, if I wanted to change the amount, I could. If I wanted to change the description, I could. If I wanted to reorganize these things, to reorder them, I could. But this is the easy part. Let's go to revenue. And so let's just presume that we're like a lot of Western states, and we've got cities are funded by a property tax and by a sales tax. And so I selected property tax. And so we're going to say, we're going to ask you own a home, and you can customize these things. It's sort of like a little bit of a wizard. And then we need to put in the multiplier value, which is generally the mill levy. So I think I've got my place value right. I'm going to put in 0.008. I'm going to presume 80 mills, which is pretty typical for around my part of the country. And then if I wanted, this is where I could put in the link to the assessor's website. So I could go over here to Jefferson County, and I could pull in the website for that, and we can just say click here for assessor's site, and then I'm going to click here, and so I'm just going to add that real quick, and then I'm going to save it, and then I hope that maybe that didn't go through, and then go to the sales tax. And so typically sales tax here in Colorado, it's usually around 7% that you pay at the cash register, but usually only about 2% or so, 2.5% is actually something that would be the municipal part. And I'm going to turn this off just for simplicity. This allows you to sort of make an estimate of how much you're actually spending in town. Okay, so if I did this correctly, we've got revenue, we've got spending, and then we've got some settings. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm actually just going to show you what I just created, and hopefully I did it correctly. So it's going to say, want a receipt for your demo town taxes, and answer a couple questions. So once again, we're estimating the sales tax. So I'm going to say $60,000 worth of income, and I'm going to say, a 35-year-old. And so then it's going to do a lookup and give it, and then multiply it times that 2%. And then we're going to say, do you own a home? What's the assessed value of your primary residence? The town that I'm thinking of that has the $80,000, the 80 mills, I think that they've got an average of about $35,000 for assessed value. I think it's more like $400,000 for actual value. And then I can view my tax receipt. And so once again, here we have police at $141. So California is more expensive, and I think we had a little bit lower income, a little bit lower value here. Police operations, 101. People can go over here, and I noticed Virginia Beach, I don't think had these, but you can actually bring in these info icons if you want, and have all sorts of things, links, videos, etc. So you really are letting people know the value that they're getting. Parks and Recreation, $62.85, etc. So a total tax flow that's going annually to this city for this person would be $611, $331 for sales tax, $280 for property tax. So it obviously it takes a little bit more thought. We had the spending categories already created, but as you can see, it's not dauntingly difficult. And I think there is sort of a good logic to it. And the nice thing about it is on the resident end, it's very simple and understandable. Okay, so I want to go back and now say a little bit about what you get when you go to this trouble to provide this to your residents. I loved what Meghan was saying earlier about trust from sort of almost like a little bit of a social science research perspective, and then what Hunter talked about in terms of trust that he's actually felt and experienced as they try to, help residents understand why you need to invest in, stormwater and those types of things. But there's some pretty good research about this actually, and so this top quote comes from the United Kingdom, and in the United Kingdom, the federal government there mailed out 24 million paper versions of a taxpayer receipt. And so that was such a large sample that they were able to really study it and to understand what they got from that. And what they found was that it's maybe the best way, the best form of transparency. So I sort of talked about those three forms of financial transparency: the budget book, data visualization dashboard, and a taxpayer receipt. Well, the taxpayer receipt just crushes it in terms of actually providing meaningful knowledge gain and valuable value in terms of transparency. This next one comes from MIT, and it's for a while, the White House actually had a taxpayer receipt that it had available at the federal government. And what they found was, this actually breaks down polarization, that it's actually a really positive thing. And it gives people, a sense of, gosh, this is what I'm paying in taxes. This is what I get for it. And people just feel a little bit less angry about their taxes when they sort of have a way of thinking about it that way. So once again, really good information, and both a validation from Hunter and so from some other research that Meghan was talking about that it provides these effects. And now we're getting some really large studies that also show some of the benefits of it. I just grabbed this slide from another presentation that Meghan gave a while ago, but I liked it so much. Because if we really are trying to increase trust, there's a lot of reasons why you want to have financial transparency, but I think building trust is one of those. That here are some things you can do. You can increase better communication. I think that the receipt actually does that really nicely. Transparency. This is all about accountability. It's like, here's what you pay and here's what you get. Collaboration. Maybe this isn't the tool for collaboration, but it certainly doesn't prevent that. It's a great way to reach hard to reach people. So the TV stations pick up on this, and people do it on their phone. It's actually, I think, pretty handy. And then I think it's a really nice, accessible way for people to understand, what are you spending money on? Does it help to serve equity and so forth? So I think just a really powerful tool to help build trust. And I wanted to end. This is a slide I'm really looking forward to, working with the data scientists at Polco to learn a little bit more about this. But one of the things that they found is that when you increase knowledge, that you increase public trust. And when public trust is increased, you can do some awesome things. And so there's a correlation between increasing trust and confidence. So for those of you who are statisticians, you'll know what this means. But this is the one that I really like, that there's a statistically significant increase in people's perception of value for services paid when they understand it. So this is something that's worth investing in and worth doing. And I think the taxpayer receipt can be a really useful tool for you to do that. So I'm going to stop there and see if we have any conversation.
Oh, I think there's a lot of conversation to be had. We've got some really great questions. And I love that last slide of kind of tracking confidence and belief in kind of value for dollars. That's about 30 years worth of research from the National Research Center that shows that over time, over political turnover, upheaval, over rapid modernization of local government processes, those things still track together. So I feel I have some compliments for Hunter and his work. I think there's a lot of things to pull out from how they reflect their groupings of expenditures on their taxpayer receipt and on their simulations as well. It seems very reflective of strategic planning and engagement processes. And I think it's presented in a way that feels really recognizable to people who have participated or understood those processes before. So it's just a really nice through line of all of that great work that you're doing. But I'll save that kind of nerdery for a few minutes and we'll get through some of these questions. So Elizabeth had some great questions about just how you, Hunter, specifically have organized your taxpayer receipt, and Garrett has done some early answering, but Elizabeth was wondering if the taxpayer receipt is a combination of your operating and your capital improvement projects budget. And also had a question about like something like an IT line item. So when you have a line item like that, does it represent the whole department, or are you rolling up a combination of items? And it's kind of two different questions, but.
So first, it doesn't primarily include capital projects. That's primarily due to us having a massive capital portfolio with, debt financing, and we have 7 or 8 funds that all go into different debt financing projects. So it's a little bit more nuanced than we could show in a taxpayer receipt that would be accurate and reflective in an honest manner. And because we have a resort area within Virginia Beach, which is what we're most known for, and that's all funded by separate taxes that have been levied on the resort area with agreements. So we have tons of capital projects that are reflected in our capital section that are not funded by general fund taxes, and we can't strip those and bifurcate them effectively to show, because like we have meals tax that goes to the general fund and to the tourism investment funds, and it's really, really difficult to have a true dollar amount until after the fact, and we can show that after the fact. And we have historic data to prove that we're doing it appropriately, but it's hard to show it on the front end, and people are all over that because they care about their tourism and how the oceanfront looks. But then the second thing, for IT, it is a department for us, but we also have an entire capital section that's just IT. So we do have a nuance in IT department, but for us, we do have an entirely in-house IT department, which is a little bit unusual. But in our taxpayer receipt, every line is a specific department until you get to the capital section. And when we show a capital section, well, I said we have a separate capital IT, or like a capital project that we don't show in our taxpayer receipt. The only thing we show that's capital in there is what we would term as pay-go or straight cash payments. So it'd be like ongoing annual investment that we know we're doing in cash to fund a specific project that either wouldn't get debt financing. So IT projects are actually something more frequently that you can't get government bonds on. But the other thing would be if it's just something that is a small enough payment that we have to reflect it in a capital project, but is more accurately paid for or more financially responsibly paid for in cash.
Yeah. It sounds like you have the flexibility to determine what you represent that is most reflective of that individual household contribution that doesn't muddy the water with some of these other funds and places, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I think, where it's really important. I love what Virginia Beach has done, because one of the biggest judgments or choices that you need to make if you're setting up either a simulation or a taxpayer receipt is what do you want those categories and those subcategories to be. And historically, Virginia Beach has been, I think, terrific in terms of not just showing departmental expenditures, but actually tying it to a goal. So it's be a safe city as opposed to, the police department, because those are, they're certainly related, but what you really want is you want to be a safe city as opposed to just having a police department. You want the police department to serve that goal. And I think, and so there's been some really nice judgment. I think even some nimbleness on behalf of Virginia Beach to be able to adjust its budget and its budget presentation so that it can actually be oriented towards goals and outcomes, which I think is really positive. Once again, another thing that GFOA is really encouraging as we have this opportunity to rethink budgeting.
Yeah, and I think that can be a little bit of, instead of having line items that reflect maybe internal speak or acronyms or departments that don't connect residents to the actual outcomes of those departments and those efforts, can do a lot in welcoming more participation and feedback into this process. Because when we're only using terms that make sense to us internally, of course, it doesn't necessarily convey that we are welcoming other people's feedback in and on this process. So I think you've done such a really lovely job of, like Chris said, like tying those things to goals that you have heard are important to your community in a way that it's very easy for them to understand and dig into.
Yeah, it's not just public works, or it's not just planning. It comes under a banner of 21st century infrastructure. And that's something that people can kind of get behind. I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so two other kind of related questions, and this I think for either Hunter or Chris, but we'll start with Hunter. What type of feedback are you getting from residents? Are you generally hearing from residents on something like this? And do we have any sort of metrics or tracking on how many folks are filling this out in Virginia Beach or in other communities?
We do have the metrics. When you sign up for Balancing Act, you can choose to have analytics and look at that stuff. And there's a dashboard when you open it up. So we track that annually. We report it to council, our city council, in private memos. And if they request it, we put it out publicly too. Sometimes they just don't need it to go out to public. The public does engage, and we do see a lot of engagement in terms of commentary, specifically generally on our simulation, and prioritize more so in the taxpayer receipt. But we definitely have people who have used the taxpayer receipt and then use that to educate their comments on the other tools, because we see things that the average citizen probably just doesn't know off the top of their head. Like if they did, that's incredible. But we tend to see citizens when they're showing up, or they're truly invested, or we come to a meeting and they can see it. It's very similar to what Chris was saying, of where their attention diffuses. Like they could be like, why do we have an agriculture department? We don't want an agriculture department. We're a big city. What are you doing? And then they look and they're like, oh, I pay $1.20 for the agriculture department. I don't care anymore. I'm not upset by that. We can have an agriculture department, and it diffuses that tension and relaxes people, and they're not so upset by the vast things that you have to do in localities.
And you also can say what that ag department does if you want to, with
Yep.
the video or yeah, the explanation. Chris, any other thoughts about kind of feedback that you think folks generally hear, or metric tracking?
Well, I remember a couple of years ago, I was at, I think it was the ICMA conference, and I was having a beer with some people from another company, but another gov tech company, and they were all from Denver. We didn't know each other that well, and without any prompting, this person that I was sitting with said, "Did you know that Denver has a taxpayer receipt?" And actually, that made me feel quite proud, because they're excited to tell me about it. I said, yeah, actually, I had a little bit to do with that. But I do think that, to the degree that this can get out there and just become, a form of accountability, but also, as Hunter was saying, sort of right sizing what that accountability is. So for $1.20, I bet that the benefit that you get from the agriculture department in Virginia Beach is extremely high, and it's also only $1.20. So I think it's just a nice way to just sort of put things in context and, focus the conversation where it really needs to go. If you're, the big ticket items in places like Virginia Beach are going to be things like, infrastructure and stormwater and stuff like that, or public safety. And there really is a lot of conversation that needs to happen there. And so I think it's an opportunity for you to frame a discussion where it needs to be. So if police patrol is a big issue, if you're looking at, having a 6-minute response time versus a 5-minute response time versus 7-minute response time, those have big differences in price tags. And so that might be an area where you want to drive some conversation with people, and you could use, these simulation tools as a way to do that in a productive, fact-based way.
Oh, we're getting lots of questions rolling in now. Okay, so we have two from Jamie and Elizabeth that I think are somewhat related, and I will ask a follow-up if I don't feel like we've tackled that. But there's some questions about where the taxpayer receipt pulls its data from.
So the taxpayer receipt, I kind of went quickly through this because I think Megan used a word I hadn't turned nerded out. Did you say, or nerdling?
Yeah, I think I called us government nerds, maybe.
Government nerds.
I meant it, but also I could find better ways to say that, I think.
Right. So I don't want to, so I went fast on it because in some ways it's so simple, but I might have gone so fast that I might have mystified it a little bit. So if you've ever seen one of the Balancing Act budget simulations, the data that shows up, the categories and the subcategories and the amounts are directly derived from the spending side of a simulation. Now, if you have a simulation, that's great. So I'm guessing that when Hunter makes his taxpayer receipt, he probably goes to this year's or last year's simulation and says, please make my, my taxpayer receipt based on this simulation. You don't have to do that. You can also just, say, I want to create it from scratch. And then you can go and you can type in public safety, and you can make a subcategory of police patrol, and then you can put in an amount. It's that easy. You can also do a hybrid of that. You can actually, we have a template that you can download. It's a very simple template, a CSV template that just lets you kind of, export from your ERP or from your budget system, and then, combine items so that it's at the level of presentation or the level of detail that you want your residents to think about these things. So, I may have possibly mystified it by going quickly through that, but I guess the truth is it's really not very hard and it's not very technical. So I saw one question came up about an ERP and exporting. Yes, you can do that, but if you do an export from your ERP, you're probably going to get, I'm going to guess, around 20 or 30,000 lines. I don't know, depending on your city. And really what you're looking for is something that, if you think about a grocery receipt, maybe it's your weekly grocery shopping, you might have 30 items on there. And if you have much more than that, I think you once again start to risk that overload in the same vein as having numbers that are so big that nobody can comprehend them.
Becomes a CSV or what is it called? A CVS receipt when you go to the drugstore and you get the long receipt as opposed to the tiny grocery.
Yeah.
That's helpful. So it's manual. It's coming from the staff. It's being put in ways that they feel are reflective not only to the budget that they've worked on, but also to the outcomes and groupings that that will make sense for the residents.
Yeah, and one thing I usually tell folks is that you have the curse, the public administrators, public officials, you have the curse of knowing too much. So if Hunter wanted to put everything he knows and everything he thinks is important in his 40-hour-a-week job, probably more than 40-hour-a-week job, and have that on the tax receipt, it would be overwhelming to people. So I would suggest that you should try to come up with maybe 20 to 25 items that are important, public facing, that you want the public to know about and understand. And then to understand, let them have an approximation of how much they're paying to support that service for the community.
Yeah. A great question about use case. Can the taxpayer receipt be used for water, sewer, or utility bills? And if not, would you consider adding that functionality in the future?
Absolutely. So so on the spending side, it would just be whatever spending items you want to present, which I don't think would be hard. And we didn't even show you a lot of the really cool things you can do with providing context. Like you can put in a video, or you can put in a graph or a photo, that kind of thing. But the only thing we need to work out with you that might be a little bit custom is what revenue would you want people to have and where would it come from? So we've got really nice ways of including income, estimating sales tax, and including property tax. It's not too difficult then to extend to the motor vehicle tax that Virginia Beach has. We've come up with ways of estimating restaurant tax. People sort of estimate, okay, I eat out, 6 times a month, and something like that. So we just have to have a little conversation with you to understand what you wanted on that revenue side. It might be that it's pretty simple and pro forma, and there might even be a website that people could look it up on. But yeah, no problem at all.
So it really can just be customizable to whatever type of output, as long as we understand the parameters. Okay, great.
Exactly. Yeah.
A related question from Brian: does this taxpayer receipt provide a way to send out a customized receipt with a property tax bill? I think that's a great idea. Since getting this in front of enough people seems important to justify the level of effort and cost.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it seems that important. And so it doesn't right now create a printed version that could be inserted. But I don't think that'd be terribly hard. I mean, we'd certainly want to bring our engineering team in to do that. But Polco, while it is a GovTech company, it also does a lot of surveys that use the US mail and paper and even phone calls. So yeah, that wouldn't be a problem at all. We just need to sort of work out what that would look like. I think it would be pretty achievable, probably.
Yeah, and an early step would be, including on the property tax bill that the municipality is already printing, a link to a call to action in that bill that says go view your taxpayer receipt with this.
Yeah, you could certainly. So we have seen that, and there's been a lot of success is attaching like a QR code to a utility bill that goes out to everybody anyway that says, use your phone and, go to, scan this code and boom, you're there. But, adding a paper one, it's very kind of, old school, like, print something, on a piece of paper, put the piece of paper in the envelope, put it in the mail, but that would work just fine.
Yeah, I mean, the UK did it right. I love it for the visibility component and for the impact to make sure that it lands at almost every household or every household. But there's the value of the digital panel too, right? Driving folks to the site, getting them to sign up. And so that you can then, Brian can continue to show and demonstrate what the decisions that are being made, how they're tied to the budget, how that affects households, and kind of keep that thread of transparency going.
Yep, absolutely.
I think that is wrapping up for questions. We might have one more. Let me do that. We've got some requests for receiving a copy of this presentation. We're absolutely going to send this out tomorrow to everybody. Garrett, do you want to drop your email address in the chat for anyone that might have follow-up questions? Garrett is a great person to connect with if you have additional use case questions or want to see kind of a deeper look at this or any of the other balancing act tools. It's just garrett@polco.us. And I think that that's it. We can do our thanks and goodbyes, I think, and we'll start with Hunter. Thank you so much for joining us today and talking us through all of the great work you're doing in Virginia Beach.
Thank you all for having me. This is great.
Chris, anything else?
No, I'm just kind of reflecting back on, I think we've had about 3 primary points of contact at Virginia Beach over the last 8 years, and each one has been so smart and committed and thoughtful and even creative. I mean, the way that you talk about this, Hunter, is different than the 2 people that came before you, and there must be something in the air there about this that sort of supports good governance. I've noticed that actually throughout Virginia. There's just a very high level of professionalism among your public administrators. So it's great to work with you, and I appreciate you sharing your new use cases. And I'm going to invite you, if you have some new ideas about, that could challenge us to make the tool better or to create a new tool, just like the CFO of the city of Denver challenged us to make Balancing Act after we created the simulation. We're all ears. And that goes for anybody on the call, actually.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Hunter. Thank you, everyone, so much for your attention. Great questions today. We'll follow up tomorrow with some resources and a recording of this presentation. And hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, everyone.